The sun was setting behind the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The air was dry and cold, and dust danced in the wind. Chief Davis and his SEAL team moved slowly through the narrow valley. They had been walking for hours, staying low. Using the fading light as cover, their mission was clear: locate and intercept a known enemy leader hiding in a remote village. But something felt off, and every man in the unit could sense it. Corporal Ramirez scanned the ridgelines with his scope. "I don't like this," he whispered. "Too quiet." The others nodded silently, weapons ready, nerves tight. The valley walls were steep, almost like a trap, and now their radios had started acting strange, signals weak, full of static. They reached the edge of a dried riverbed and paused. Chief Davis raised a fist. "Halt." He opened his map and pointed to a cave symbol. "This is fallback point Alpha," he said quietly. "If things go wrong, we regroup here." Everyone memorized it. Because in hostile territory, nothing ever goes according to plan. Suddenly, Sergeant Lee, walking rearguard, froze. He heard a soft click behind a rock before he could react. A burst of gunfire erupted from both sides of the valley. "Ambush!" someone shouted. The team dove for cover as bullets cracked through the air like lightning. Explosions followed, small grenades thrown from above. They were surrounded completely. Chief Davis fired back with calm precision. "Fall back to the rocks."
"Defensive circle!"
They moved as a unit, dragging wounded, returning fire. But the enemy was prepared. Positions above, rifles locked, movements coordinated. This wasn't random. They had been waiting for the SEALs. Private Nolan screamed in pain, a bullet hitting his shoulder. Ramirez pulled him behind a boulder, covering him while Davis called for support. "Echo command. This is Falcon 1, requesting immediate extraction, heavy contact coordinates." Only static replied. They were cut off. Time moved differently in battle. Minutes felt like hours. Smoke filled the valley, and the temperature dropped. Night was coming, and with it, colder winds and less visibility. "We can't stay here," Davis said. "They'll pick us off." He looked around, blood on his uniform, his men bruised and breathing hard. They had to move, uphill toward the fallback cave. The only hope for survival was higher ground. They moved under fire, crawling over rocks and sand. Lee threw a smoke grenade, buying seconds of confusion. Ramirez covered the left, Davis the right. They took one more hit, Corporal James in the leg, but they managed to carry him. Their boots slipped on the loose dirt, hands scraped on sharp stones. Still they climbed when they reached the cave. It was dark and narrow. They slid inside, out of breath, hearts pounding. The team was bruised, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. Lee checked the wounded while Davis looked outside. The valley below glowed with small enemy campfires. "They're settling in," Davis muttered. "They think we're trapped," and they were. No radio contact, no air support, no map out, only mountains, guns, and enemies in every direction. As the night grew colder, something moved in the distance. A flash, then a single shot, sharp, echoing across the valley. One enemy soldier dropped silently by his fire. The SEALs turned to each other, confused, then another shot. "Clean. Perfect, deadly," Ramirez whispered. "That came from the ridge, over there." Davis focused his binoculars on the far hilltop. A dark figure stood just barely visible against the night sky. He moved like a shadow, rifle long and sleek, one by one. The enemies started falling, silently, like ghosts. "Who the hell is that?" Lee whispered. No one answered. The SEALs, trapped and tired, had no idea who this silent guardian was. But tonight, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by death, a shadow on the hill had just turned the battle, and the fight for survival was not over yet. The night grew colder, and the wind howled through the valley like a ghost. Inside the small cave, the SEALs sat in silence, each man listening to the distant gunfire that had suddenly changed rhythm. The shots were sharp and clean, one after another, each landing exactly where it was meant to. Someone out there was fighting for them, but who? Chief Davis crouched near the entrance, binoculars in hand. Through the thin fog, he could barely see the outline of a tall figure on the opposite ridge. The man moved with precision, calm, silent, confident. Each shot he fired echoed down the mountains, followed by the fall of an enemy. It was like watching a ghost at work. Ramirez whispered, "Could be one of ours?" Davis shook his head slowly. No friendly unit was near this sector. The comms were still jammed. No way to confirm. All they could do was watch down in the valley. Panic spread among the insurgents. Their fires went out one by one. Their shouting grew frantic. They fired wildly into the dark, hitting nothing. The sniper, whoever he was, kept shooting with the patience of a hunter. Each round landed with the cold precision of someone who knew both the land and the enemy's fear. By dawn, the gunfire stopped. Smoke rose from the valley floor. Dozens of enemy bodies lay scattered across the dirt. And just as quietly as he had appeared, the sniper vanished, not a trace left, no movement. No signal, no sound. Chief Davis stepped outside. Feeling the chill morning air, he scanned the hills but saw nothing. Only silence and dust. For a moment he thought maybe they had imagined it, a trick of exhaustion. But the empty rifle shells around the enemy camp said otherwise. Someone had saved them. The SEALs rested for a few minutes, eating cold rations and patching wounds. Lee wrapped James's leg again, while Ramirez watched the horizon. Every man was thinking the same thing, but no one said it aloud. Who was the man on the hill? Later that morning, they began to move again. Their mission had failed. No target captured, no safe route out. They had to reach the extraction point before the next wave came. They moved slowly through the valley, stepping over broken weapons and empty shells. Each sound echoed too loudly. Even the birds had fled. Halfway through the valley, they found something strange. On a flat rock sat a small piece of cloth, torn and faded but marked with a single word in Arabic. Ramirez picked it up and read softly, "Brother." Davis stared at it for a long moment. Someone left this for us. The others exchanged uneasy glances. It was as if the stranger wanted them to know this wasn't over. As they climbed toward the higher ridge, a sudden explosion tore through the rocks below them. "Mortar fire, fresh and close, down," Davis shouted. The team dove for cover as the earth shook. The insurgents were back, regrouped and furious. Dozens of them advancing from below, shouting battle cries. The SEALs fired back, but they were outnumbered again. Rounds cracked through the air, hitting the rocks near their heads. Lee yelled, "We can't hold this line." Then, another familiar sound, crack, crack, crack. That same calm rhythm, bullets flying not toward them but over their shoulders into the enemy lines. Ramirez peeked through his scope and gasped, "He's back." The shadow was there again, this time closer, hidden among the rocks, moving with lightning precision. Every shot counted, every shot protected them. One insurgent after another fell before even spotting him. Davis took a deep breath. "All right, boys. Let's move with the shadow's cover." They began pushing forward, inch by inch, each step coordinated with the sniper's fire. When he paused, they ducked. When he fired again, they advanced. It felt like silent communication, like he could read their minds. After 15 minutes of chaos, the remaining enemies fled down the slope. Silence returned. The SEALs lowered their weapons. Breathing hard, covered in dust, they turned to look up at the hill. But the sniper was gone again. Only a faint shimmer of heat remained in the distance. Davis stood there for a moment, staring at the empty ridge. "Whoever he is," he said quietly, "he just saved our lives twice." Ramirez smiled weakly. "Maybe he's an angel with a rifle." Lee chuckled under his breath. "Then I'm never skipping prayer again." But Davis didn't laugh. He felt something deeper, a strange familiarity. There was something about the way that man moved, something he had seen before. That night, the team made camp under a broken stone archway. The fire burned low and no one spoke much. Each man replayed the day in his head. They owed their lives to a stranger who appeared like a shadow and vanished like one too. Davis lay awake long after the others had slept. The stars above looked cold and far away. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the ridge, he was certain the sniper was still out there, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again when they needed him most. The next morning came with a cold mist hugging the mountains. The SEAL team moved carefully, every step slow and quiet. Their bodies were sore, their minds restless, and their hearts heavy with unanswered questions. No one spoke much, but each man kept glancing up at the ridges. They all knew he was out there somewhere, the unknown sniper, watching unseen like a shadow that refused to fade. Chief Davis led the team through a dry gorge, scanning the horizon. He couldn't stop thinking about the way the sniper moved, the timing, the patience, the skill. It was rare, almost too perfect. He had seen something like that before, years ago. Back when his unit worked with a young Afghan interpreter named Qadir. Qadir had been different. He wasn't just an interpreter. He was brave, smart and loyal. He knew every trail, every ridge, and every secret path through the mountains. Once, during an ambush near Kunar, Qadir had dragged a wounded SEAL through enemy fire. He had saved a man's life that night. Afterward, he smiled and said, "Brothers once." Always, but 1 year later his village was attacked. The SEALs were too far away to help. And Qadir vanished. No one ever found a body. Only ashes as Davis walked. That memory gnawed at him like an old wound. Could it be possible? Could Qadir be alive? And could he be the one protecting them now? The thought felt impossible. And yet something deep inside told Davis it might be true. They stopped near an abandoned stone hut for cover. Ramirez checked their ammo. Low again, Lee was tending to James's leg, wrapping it tight with what little bandage remained. The radio crackled with static, no contact still. They were ghosts in enemy territory, and the world didn't even know they were fighting to stay alive. Suddenly, a faint whistle echoed from the ridge. Not wind, a signal. Davis froze, hand raised. Then something landed nearby, a small piece of cloth tied to a rock. Ramirez picked it up and unfolded it. Inside was a single cartridge shell and a symbol drawn in dirt. An eagle. Wings open wide, Davis's chest tightened. That was the same symbol Qadir once carved on his wooden pendant. The same one he gave Davis years ago before the raid. Lee looked at the mark and said softly, "That's him, isn't it?" Davis didn't answer, but his silence said enough. The team exchanged quick glances, half relief, half disbelief if it truly was Qadir. Then he was fighting alone, no backup, no supplies, no home. Only a rifle, a promise, and a mountain full of ghosts. The sound of distant gunfire broke their thoughts. The insurgents were moving again. Davis gritted his teeth. "They're hunting us. Let's move." They began climbing toward the northern ridge. The path was narrow and steep, rock slipping under their boots. At the top, they found empty shell casings, fresh ones, same caliber the sniper had used. He had been there just minutes ago. Then they saw it. A mark carved into a tree trunk, rough but clear. An eagle. Next to it, a set of footprints leading deeper into the hills. The prints were uneven, one boot, one barefoot. As if the man had been injured but refused to stop, Ramirez muttered, "He's hurt, and still fighting." Davis felt a wave of guilt crash through him. If it really was Qadir, then he had been out here alone all this time, fighting their same enemies without anyone knowing. By afternoon, the team reached a ridge overlooking another valley. Through binoculars, Davis saw enemy trucks gathering below, more than 20 men. They were preparing for another assault. If they didn't move fast, they'd be trapped again. But something was off. There was a glint of light on a far slope, a small flash, barely visible. And then one of the trucks exploded, another and then another. Precision strikes, perfectly timed. The sniper was already there. One man against an army. The SEALs watched in stunned silence as chaos erupted below. Smoke filled the air, shouts echoed, and the enemies ran in confusion. Qadir, or whoever he was, had turned the tide again. It wasn't luck. It was vengeance. Slow, silent, and absolute as night fell, the SEALs found a safe hollow behind the rocks. The wind carried faint whispers of gunfire and the smell of smoke. Ramirez sat cleaning his weapon. "You think he knows we're still alive?" Davis looked at the stars, his voice quiet. "He knows everything about these mountains." He paused. "And if it's really him, he's not doing this for glory," Lee asked softly. "Then why?" Davis answered, "Because he made a promise." The firelight flickered across their tired faces. In the distance, another faint shot rang out. One more enemy down. The night was long and full of danger, but for the first time, they didn't feel alone somewhere out there. In the dark hills of Afghanistan, a ghost from the past watched over them, bleeding, unseen, but unbroken. And the war had just become personal again. The morning sky turned gray before the sun could rise. Thick clouds rolled over the mountains like a warning. The SEAL team stood on the ridge, staring down at the valley below. Smoke still rose from the trucks destroyed the night before. But now something worse was coming. Chief Davis lowered his binoculars, face tense. "They're bringing in reinforcements," he said. Dozens of enemy fighters marched in, some on foot. Others in trucks. They carried more than rifles, machine guns, mortars, and RPGs. This wasn't just a search party anymore. This was an army, and it was coming for them. "They want to wipe us out completely," Lee said, his voice low. "And this time, they're not playing around." Ramirez nodded, loading a fresh magazine into his rifle. "We won't survive this without help." But they all knew. Help wasn't coming. The radios were still dead. They were cut off and the enemy knew it. Davis made a decision. We move now. Follow the sniper's trail. He pointed toward a rocky path leading up the far ridge. That's the only way out. If he's still ahead, maybe he's leading us somewhere. The team began the climb. Moving fast, they passed more spent shell casings, fresh again. Signs that their unknown protector was still fighting, still close. But then a loud boom echoed behind them, a mortar. It hit the ridge they had just left, throwing dust into the sky. They're tracking us, James shouted, dragging his injured leg as fast as he could. Another explosion shook the ground. Shrapnel cut through the air like metal rain. Davis grabbed James and pulled him behind a large boulder. Keep moving, he yelled. Use the rocks for cover. They zigzagged across the slope as more mortars hit the hills. Smoke and dirt filled their lungs. It wasn't just noise, it was chaos. The enemy was tightening the noose, but then, through the dust, another familiar sound crack, crack, crack. The sniper was back. 3 enemy gunners fell instantly, one after the other. Even under fire, his shots were calm, steady, unstoppable. The SEALs used the moment to gain ground. Ramirez helped James over a ledge while Lee provided cover fire. They reached a narrow pass just before another shell hit where they had stood. Breathing hard, covered in ash and sweat, they looked back. The sniper had changed position again, now firing from a completely different hill. He's everywhere at once, Ramirez muttered, almost in awe. But Davis noticed something else. The sniper was bleeding. Through the scope, he saw red on the man's shoulder. He was hiding it well, but every move was slower now. Still, he didn't stop. He just kept shooting, protecting them. One bullet at a time, as they moved through the pass. They came across a hidden supply cache, a backpack tucked between 2 rocks. Inside, clean water, painkillers, and extra ammo. A note was wrapped around a bullet. 1 hill left. Davis stared at the message. Only one person would know exactly what they needed. Only one person would risk leaving supplies in enemy territory. It had to be Kadir. They pressed on, hearts pounding. The last hill was steep and full of loose rocks. Lee took point, helping the others climb. The enemy was chasing from behind, gunfire echoing louder now. Closer. As they neared the top, another group of insurgents appeared ahead, blocking the way. An ambush. Gunfire exploded on both sides. The SEALs were caught in the middle, bullets slicing through trees and rocks. James was hit again. This time in the side, he collapsed, bleeding heavily. Davis dropped beside him, yelling, "I need cover!" Ramirez and Lee fired nonstop, but they were pinned down. Then, just as the enemies moved in, boom! A silent explosion erupted behind the enemy line. Dirt flew into the sky. The sniper had planted something earlier, an IED. The enemies scattered in confusion, and the SEALs pushed forward. Dragging James, bleeding and fading, they made it over the hill, finally, reaching a cliff that overlooked the extraction valley. Down below, they saw a clear landing zone. It was far, but it was reachable. As they caught their breath, they saw one last image, the sniper. Standing tall on a distant ridge, he looked at them for a moment, then turned away and vanished into the fog. "He's buying us time," Davis said quietly. Ramirez looked down at James. "We better not waste it." That night, the wind blew hard, and as the SEALs prepared to move again, wounded, exhausted, but alive, they knew the enemy would come again. Stronger than before, but they also knew something else. They weren't just a team of 5 anymore somewhere out there. One man with 1 rifle had become their shield. A ghost with a mission, and he wasn't done yet. The wind tore across the ridge like a warning, sharp and cold. It stung their faces as the SEAL team prepared to move. Below them stretched a steep, narrow path, twisting through rocks and broken shrubs, leading to a clearing miles away. That clearing was their only hope if they could reach it. A helicopter might be able to land. If they failed, they would die on this mountain. James lay pale on the ground, barely conscious. He was bleeding badly. His side wrapped tight in gauze. Chief Davis knelt beside him, checked his pulse, still beating but weak. "He won't make it if we don't get to that LZ, Davis said. Ramirez nodded, already tying a strap to help carry him. They would take turns. No matter how hard it got, James was family, and no one gets left behind. Lee looked down at the narrow trail, his eyes narrowing. "There's no cover," he said. "We'll be exposed the whole way." Davis didn't blink. "Then we move with speed and faith in each other, and faith in the ghost watching from the hills." The first few minutes were quiet. Too quiet. They took careful steps down the slope. Carrying James, weapons drawn, dust rose from their boots, leaving a trail, one the enemy could easily follow, but there was no choice. They had to trust the escape corridor. The sniper had marked it with his note. One hill left, then, from the cliffs to the east, gunfire. Bullets cracked through the air. The SEALs dropped instantly. Shielding James with their bodies, the enemy had spotted them. And now the chase was on again. Ramirez returned fire. Eyes scanning the rocks. Too many! He shouted. They're coming down both sides. Lee added. Chief Davis saw what they meant. 2 enemy units descending fast, trapping them. We keep moving. Davis yelled, don't stop. They used smoke grenades to cover their retreat. White clouds billowed, masking the trail behind them, but the enemies weren't stopping. Then, crack. Crack, crack! That sound again, like thunder after lightning. From the highest ridge, the sniper opened fire. 1 shot at a time. 3 enemies dropped immediately. The rest hesitated, panicked, unsure where the shots were coming from. The SEALs pushed forward again, step by step, dragging James. Guided by the sniper's deadly rhythm, at one point, they came to a fallen tree blocking the trail. Davis and Ramirez lifted James over, just as a bullet hit the ground next to them. Lee spun and returned fire, covering them, above. The sniper kept shooting, faster now. But Davis noticed something through his scope. The sniper was limping, even from far away. It was clear he was hurt worse than before, still he didn't stop. He couldn't. The SEALs finally reached the final stretch, a rocky flat leading to the clearing. But the enemy had beaten them there. 10 armed men stood between them and the only safe landing zone. James groaned, barely holding on. They were out of grenades, low on ammo. It was now or never. Then the sniper changed everything. A long shot echoed across the sky. One of the enemies fell. Then another. The rest scattered, firing wildly into the hills. But they couldn't see him. They couldn't stop him. The SEALs saw their moment and charged. Davis led the way, firing from the hip. Lee flanked left. Ramirez right, moving fast and hard. They fought like men possessed because behind them, one of their own was dying, and above them, 1 man bled alone so they could survive. 5 more enemies fell. The rest ran into the woods, broken and beaten. And just like that, the clearing was theirs. Davis dropped to his knees and pulled out the emergency beacon. He pressed the signal 3 times. A red flare burst into the sky. They had made it minutes later. The thundering sound of helicopter blades echoed through the valley. A Black Hawk appeared through the smoke. It hovered, descended, and the team ran toward it with James on a stretcher. Medics jumped out, pulled him inside. Ramirez and Lee climbed in next, guns still hot. Davis looked back one last time before boarding. Up on the ridge, he saw a flash of movement. A figure, tall, limping, holding a rifle. Their silent guardian. Davis raised his hand in a quiet salute. The sniper didn't wave. He simply turned and walked back into the trees. Alone, like a shadow fading with the wind as the helicopter lifted off. Davis sat beside James. The medic worked fast, trying to stop the bleeding. Outside, the mountains grew smaller. But Davis didn't feel relief, not fully, because 1 man had stayed behind. Wounded, hunted, unseen, fighting a war with no uniform, no command and no reward, only a memory, only a promise. And the war for him was not over. The helicopter blades slowed as the Black Hawk touched down at the forward operating base. Dust blew everywhere. Medics rushed in. And the SEALs climbed out one by one, worn, wounded, and silent. James was rushed to surgery, barely alive. The others were pulled into debriefing rooms, but none of them could think clearly. Their minds were still up in those hills. With the man who never came back, Chief Davis sat alone in a steel chair, his uniform torn, hands stained with dirt and blood. A major walked in holding a clipboard. "Your mission failed," the officer said flatly. Davis didn't respond. "But something strange happened up there," the officer continued. "We've reviewed satellite footage. Your unit was surrounded." "Should have been wiped out," he said bluntly. "But someone started taking out the enemy, single shots." Perfect timing. Davis finally looked up. "Yeah," he said, "we know. Any idea who it was?" Davis hesitated. 100 images flashed through his mind. The figure on the hill, the bullet casing wrapped in cloth, the mark of the eagle, the injured limp. He cleared his throat. "I might back in their quarters." Ramirez opened his gear bag and found something tucked inside. A folded paper, worn and damp, he opened it slowly, heart pounding. It was a hand-drawn map, showing their trail with markings in Arabic at the bottom. One word in English. Brothers, Lee stared at the map. Speechless. That's not standard, he said. This isn't military. No, Davis replied, taking the paper and holding it like something sacred. This is personal. Later that night, the three of them sat together under the quiet light of a bare bulb. The base was silent except for the hum of generators. Davis opened a small metal box from his locker. Inside was a wooden carving of an eagle. Old, cracked, but still whole. He gave this to me, Davis said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kadir Ramirez looked up sharply. The interpreter? From the Kunar mission? Davis nodded. He saved me once, dragged me through gunfire when I was too hurt to move. He said brothers once, always, before he disappeared. We thought he died in the village fire, Lee added quietly. But what if he didn't? Davis said, what if he survived? The room fell silent. Outside, a cold wind blew across the sand. Inside, three men stared at the truth they had never imagined. The next morning, a sealed brown package arrived at the base with no name, no return address. Security handed it to Davis with suspicion. He opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a carved wooden bird. An eagle, new untouched beneath it, a photo. The photo was old, maybe 10 years. A group of SEALs standing in the Afghan sun, all smiling, and in the middle, Kadir. Younger, thinner, but unmistakably him. There was a note taped to the back. I keep my promises. Chief, not all shadows are enemies. Davis felt his throat tighten. It was real. Kadir had been out there this whole time. Watching, helping, fighting, not for orders, but for something stronger, loyalty. He handed the photo to Ramirez and Lee. Nobody said a word, they didn't need to. Sometimes silence carried more than words ever could. That night, they placed the new eagle carving on the team's wall of honor. Between medals and framed flags, it stood without a name. But every man on the base who saw it felt something strange. Not fear, not confusion, respect. They called him the shadow on the hill. No uniform, no rank, no medals, but more soldier than most would ever be. And somewhere out there, he still walked the mountains. Still watching, still keeping his promise. Weeks passed and new missions came. The world moved on. But Chief Davis never stopped wondering, where was Kadir now? Was he safe? Would they ever meet again? Not on the battlefield, but face to face as brothers once more. Then one quiet evening, a young Afghan boy came to the base gates. Holding a small package, he said nothing. Just handed it to the guard and walked away. Inside was a single shell casing, polished and clean. Etched into the brass was a message. Still watching, Davis held the casing tightly and smiled for the first time in days. Because in a world full of war, betrayal, and noise, one man kept his word, a man with no flag, no voice, only a rifle and a promise. The weeks turned into months. The mountains stayed the same, cold, sharp, and dangerous. But inside the forward base, something had changed. The story of the shadow on the hill spread through the ranks like fire. New recruits whispered about him at night. Veterans lowered their voices when they spoke his name. Some said he was just a myth, a ghost made up to explain how a doomed SEAL team survived. Others swore they saw him too. A dark figure on a ridge, moving like wind, firing with impossible accuracy. But Chief Davis and his men knew the truth. It wasn't a myth, it was a man. And his name was Kadir in the command center. One of the intel officers pinned a blurry satellite photo on the board. It showed a lone figure standing beside a burning truck, rifle slung over his shoulder. The caption read, "Unknown shooter, unconfirmed identity." But Davis had already confirmed it in his heart. He didn't need a face. He had the carved eagle, the photo, the shell casing, and a promise that echoed louder than any bullet. Back in the SEAL quarters, Ramirez carved a small mark into the wooden wall beside their badges. An eagle, it was rough, uneven, but full of meaning. "Looks better than most medals," Lee said, half smiling. Davis nodded. He earned every line of it. Then one night, something unexpected happened. A supply convoy was attacked near the southern road, ambushed by over 20 insurgents with machine guns and RPGs. It should have been a massacre. But by the time a rescue team arrived, the enemies were all dead. Every last one of them. No signs of vehicles. No bodies of allies, just a hilltop with fresh shell casings, and a trail that disappeared into the rocks. "That's him again," Ramirez whispered when he heard the news. Davis just stared at the report. There was no doubt Kadir was still watching, still protecting, but why? He had no orders, no backup, no reward. He doesn't fight for a flag, Davis said one evening, sitting on a crate outside the barracks. He fights for something else. Lee lit a cigarette. Loyalty, Ramirez added, and maybe guilt. Davis looked up at the stars. Or maybe just love. A week later, a local village chief came to the base gates. He carried a letter with no stamp. No name, only a wax seal marked with an eagle. Inside was a short message, handwritten in careful English. I know where they're planning the next ambush. Chief Southridge, midnight, no need to thank me. The base commander was stunned. How does this guy even know our patrol routes? Davis only smiled. He doesn't need maps. He walks the land. He listens to the wind. They sent a drone to the South Ridge that night. And just as promised, a full ambush team was waiting with dug-in positions, tripwires, and explosives. The mission was canceled. Lives were saved. And still, no one saw him. Over time, the legend of the sniper grew beyond the base. Special forces teams began leaving tokens at ridge trails. Bullets with eagle carvings, folded bandanas, handwritten notes that simply said, thank you. Some nights, those notes disappeared. Sometimes extra ammo would appear in their place. Other times, nothing. Only silence in the briefing room. An entire wall was dedicated to unidentified engagements. The chart had red pins for confirmed enemy kills, and many were marked with a quiet symbol next to them, a carved eagle. Even the general took notice. This man, he said in a meeting, is doing the work of a full unit alone. But why? No one could answer, but Chief Davis could. He's not alone, he said softly. He's still with us. Then one night, an unfamiliar man arrived at the base gates. He wasn't a soldier. He wore a cloak, had a long beard, and carried no weapons. He asked for Davis by name. The guard searched him but found nothing. He only had a pouch of herbs and a folded piece of cloth. Davis met him at the gate, cautious but calm. The man bowed slightly and handed over the cloth. Inside it was a blood-stained scarf, one Davis recognized. Kadir used to wear it, tied around his wrist in every operation. The man spoke in broken English. He lives, he said, but he is tired. Too many battles. Too many ghosts. Davis's throat tightened. Where is he? The man shook his head. He will not return. But he watches still, then he left. Walking into the darkness, no name, no goodbye, just the wind and silence again that night. Davis placed the scarf next to the eagle on the wall of honor. He didn't say a word, he just stood there, saluting the space where a brother should be, a man with no rank, no medal, but more courage than anyone Davis had ever known. And in the hills beyond the base, cold, sharp, and endless, a rifle was still watching, a promise was still alive, and a legend continued to grow. The mountains were quiet again, but silence in this land never meant peace. It only meant something was coming, and that something was always war. Back at the forward operating base, Chief Davis stood on the roof, scanning the horizon through dusty binoculars. He had done this every morning since they returned. It had become a habit, watching the hills, waiting for a sign, but for the last 2 weeks, there had been nothing. No letters, no tokens, no movement. The shadow that once protected them had vanished. Until now, a soldier ran up the stairs breathless, holding a message. Sir, we just got a drone feed, he said. Something you'll want to see. Davis followed him down to the operations tent. On the screen, a ridgeline familiar to Davis, one they'd patrolled months ago. The feed zoomed in. A small group of insurgents was surrounding a U.S. recon unit. Trapped in a narrow canyon, 5 soldiers, no way out, pinned down. Davis leaned forward, eyes locked. But before he could speak, something changed on the screen. The camera panned left, a single figure appeared. Standing alone on the edge of a higher ridge, tall, steady, holding a long rifle, the tech whispered, Sir, that can't be. Davis's chest tightened. It's him, he said softly. The shadows back on the screen, the figure knelt, aimed, and fired, once, twice, 3 times, each shot hit with perfect timing. The enemy scattered, confused, and disoriented. The recon team used the moment to escape into the hills. Lives saved again, no communication. No name, no thanks, just one man and one last shot. But then, something unexpected. The drone showed the sniper stumble. He dropped behind a rock and didn't rise again. Davis's hands clenched. Zoom in, he ordered. The image came into focus. Blood. A dark stain on the rocks. A trail leading down the back of the ridge. The sniper had been hit, and this time, it looked serious. Davis didn't wait. He grabbed his gear and called for a chopper. "I need to go out there," he told command. They resisted at first, but Davis didn't back down. "This isn't just another ghost," he said. "This is a man. And we don't leave our own behind." 2 hours later, the helicopter hovered over the ridge where the sniper had last been seen. Davis and Ramirez rappelled down, landing near the blood trail. The rocks were still warm from the sun. They followed the trail for almost half a mile, each step heavier than the last. Finally, they found him lying beneath a tree, face turned toward the sky. The rifle was placed neatly beside him. His eyes were half closed, breathing shallow, but he was alive. "Kadir," Davis whispered, kneeling beside him. The man opened his eyes barely and gave a small smile. "Chief," he said, voice rough. "You came back," Davis nodded, choking back emotion. "You didn't think we'd leave you out here, did you?" Kadir laughed softly, even in pain. "Didn't expect medals," he whispered. "Just didn't want them to die. Like my village did." Ramirez called for the medevac, voice urgent. Davis held Kadir's hand as the wind picked up again. "You saved so many, brother," he said. "You're not just a shadow. You're the reason we made it out." Kadir's eyes drifted to the rifle. "Don't forget the hills," he said slowly. "They remember everything." Then his voice fell silent. The helicopter arrived minutes later. They lifted him gently, carefully. Davis sat beside him the whole flight back. And when they landed, doctors took over. Kadir made it through surgery. Barely. He would never fight again, but he would live. In the days that followed, the base changed. Word spread that the shadow was real and that he had a name. Soldiers from all over came to leave messages near the ridge where he was found. Eagles carved in stone, notes that read, "We see you now. Thank you. Brother, you saved us all." A month later, Kadir quietly left the base. No ceremony, no goodbye. He simply walked into the dawn with a cane in one hand and a small backpack in the other. Where he went, no one knew. But Davis believed he returned to the hills, not to fight, but to rest. To finally let go of the war he had carried alone for so long. Years later, a new SEAL unit would patrol the same ridge. They'd hear the stories, see the carvings, and one of them would ask, "Do you think he's still out there?" Chief Davis, older now, would smile and say, "He doesn't need to be. Because what he did, what he gave, it lives in us now." And so the legend stayed. Not as a myth, but as a man, a brother, a guardian, a shadow who became the light, and all it took was one last shot,